Jake Thompson stretched his legs under the cramped desk and tried to ignore the strange smells filling the massive lecture hall. 3 months at Galactic University, and he still wasn't used to sharing space with 200 alien species. The Korthak students smelled like sulfur. The Velnari gave off a sweet, cloying scent that made his head spin. And don't even get him started on whatever the blob-like Zephyrians were secreting. He was one of only 3 humans in the entire university. The other 2, Rebecca from London and Tyler from Texas, were in the engineering program. Jake had chosen xenobiology because, honestly, he'd always been fascinated by weird animals back on Earth. Turns out alien life was even weirder. The lecture hall itself was a marvel of engineering, with seats that adjusted to accommodate everything from tiny fairy-like Pixari to massive rock creatures called stonards. Jake's human-sized chair felt lost in the middle of it all. Above him, a flyer student hung upside down from the ceiling perches, while to his left, a student that looked like a walking tree communicated through color changes in its bark. Professor Veltar dominated the front of the room. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, the insectoid professor commanded attention with his 4 powerful arms and compound eyes that seemed to track every student simultaneously. His voice carried perfectly through the hall's translation system, converting his natural clicks and whistles into whatever language each student needed. Today we begin your major project for the semester, Professor Veltar announced, his mandibles clicking with authority. Each of you will research and present your homeworld's ecosystem. This presentation will demonstrate how your species adapted to environmental pressures through evolutionary processes. Jake felt a familiar sinking feeling. Group projects were hard enough when everyone was human. Here, he was dealing with species that communicated through telepathy, pheromones, or electromagnetic pulses. The 3-armed Treelock student in front of him was already taking notes with all 3 hands simultaneously. Your presentations will be evaluated on scientific accuracy, evolutionary insight, and demonstration of adaptive mechanisms. The professor continued. This project carries 40% of your final grade. Several students began forming discussion groups immediately. Jake watched as natural alliances formed along species lines. The silicon-based students gravitated toward each other, their crystalline bodies chiming softly as they communicated. The aquatic species clustered near the room's moisture vents, their breathing apparatus humming quietly. Nobody approached Jake. This wasn't exactly surprising. Humans were classified as Category C species in the Galactic Federation's database. Newly discovered, technologically primitive, from a standard garden world in the Outer Rim. Most of his classmates came from far more impressive backgrounds. Take Mordek, for instance. The red-skinned, heat-resistant humanoid came from Pyros, a world where lava flows served as highways and volcanic activity powered their entire civilization. His people had evolved natural heat resistance that let them swim in molten rock. Or Zilana, whose delicate, translucent features belied her origin on Nimbus 7, a gas giant where her people lived in floating cities miles above the crushing atmospheric pressure below. Her species had developed natural bioelectric fields that let them manipulate magnetic currents for flight. Even the smaller species had impressive origins. The mouse-like squeakers came from a world with gravity 3 times Earth's normal, making them incredibly strong despite their size. The plant-like Verdani could photosynthesize directly from starlight and hadn't needed to eat traditional food for millions of years. And then there was Earth, 1 star, mostly water, oxygen atmosphere, standard gravity. Jake had read the Federation's file on his homeworld. The summary was embarrassingly brief. Unremarkable terrestrial world. Single biome. No extreme environmental pressures. Species evolved under optimal conditions. As students continued forming groups around him, Jake overheard fragments of excited discussion in languages the translator couldn't quite handle. He caught enough to know they were already planning presentations about acid rain adaptations, pressure-resistant evolution, and radiation immunity. Professor Veltar began calling for volunteers to claim presentation topics. Immediately, claws, tentacles, and appendages shot up across the room. Mordek of Pyros, volcanic adaptation biology. Zilana of Nimbus 7, atmospheric pressure resistance. Cretal of Christos, silicon-based mineral integration. Jake listened as student after student claimed fascinating homeworlds with extreme conditions and remarkable evolutionary solutions. The list grew: radiation-soaked worlds, ice planets, desert kingdoms, underwater civilizations, and dimensions where the very laws of physics worked differently. When the initial rush died down, Jake surprised himself by raising his hand. A few students turned to look at him, and he caught what sounded suspiciously like alien snickering. The crystalline student beside him chimed something that made several neighbors flash colors in apparent amusement. Professor Veltar's compound eyes focused on Jake with what might have been surprise. "Yes, human Jake?" "I'll take Earth," Jake said simply. The chiming intensified, and several students exchanged what were clearly the alien equivalent of amused glances. Even Professor Veltar seemed slightly taken aback. "Very well, human Jake." The professor clicked after a moment's hesitation. "Earth it is." As the professor moved on to other volunteers, Jake caught whispered comments around the room. Words like boring, easy topic, and garden world filtered through the translation system. Jake just smiled quietly to himself. If only they knew. Jake walked in front of the lecture hall, his hands slightly sweaty as he gripped his presentation remote. 3 weeks of preparation had led to this moment. While his classmates had been researching exotic evolutionary adaptations and extreme planetary conditions, Jake had been doing something much simpler. He'd been describing home. The massive holographic display flickered to life behind him, showing familiar blue and white swirls of Earth from space. A few students in the back were already talking among themselves, clearly expecting this to be the most boring presentation of the semester. "My home world has 71% water coverage, oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, and orbits a single yellow star," Jake began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's sound system. The response was immediate and predictable. Yawns echoed from various parts of the room, though they sounded more like whistles, hisses, and low harmonic drones depending on the species. A group of flyers hanging from the ceiling perches were already preening their feathers, clearly preparing to nap through his presentation. Mordek, the heat-resistant student from the lava world, leaned back in his reinforced chair and crossed his arms. His red skin seemed to pulse with barely contained thermal energy, and Jake caught him making a dismissive gesture to the crystalline student beside him. "Standard garden world parameters," Professor Veltar noted, his compound eyes already shifting toward his grading tablet. "Please continue with your evolutionary pressures analysis." Jake clicked his remote, and the peaceful image of Earth from space disappeared. In its place, a satellite image filled the screen, a massive white spiral stretching across hundreds of miles of ocean, with a clearly defined eye in the center. "Now, I'll cover our daily survival challenges," Jake said, his tone remaining conversational and casual. The change in the room was immediate. The casual chatter died down as students focused on the image. The white spiral looked almost beautiful from space, but something about its size seemed to capture their attention. "These occur regularly during certain seasons," Jake explained, advancing to a time-lapse sequence showing the hurricane's formation and movement. "We call them hurricanes. The winds reach over 200 miles per hour, and as you can see, they cover areas larger than some of your smaller moons." A sharp intake of breath came from somewhere in the middle of the room. The Trilok student who had been taking notes with all 3 hands had stopped writing entirely. Jake clicked again, showing before and after photos of a coastal city. The first image showed a thriving metropolitan area with tall buildings, busy streets, and a bustling harbor. The second showed the same area looking like a war zone. Buildings reduced to rubble, cars thrown on top of each other, boats sitting in the middle of what used to be downtown streets. "They tear apart cities," Jake said matter-of-factly. "This particular storm destroyed about 80% of the infrastructure you see in the first image." The chittering and background noise that had filled the room since the beginning of class stopped completely. Even the flyers had stopped preening and were staring at the screen with their large, unblinking eyes. Jake advanced to the next slide, a cone of destruction cutting through a residential area. Tornadoes are smaller but more focused. They're like spinning columns of air that touch down randomly. He showed footage of an EF5 tornado, the camera shaking as debris filled the air like a blizzard of destruction. "This one is picking up entire buildings and throwing them around like toys." The tornado footage was particularly dramatic. Houses exploding into splinters, semi-trucks spinning through the air, and trees being ripped from the ground roots and all. The camera work was shaky and desperate, clearly shot by someone who was simultaneously terrified and fascinated by what they were witnessing. We rate them on a scale of 1 to 5. Jake continued, 5 being the strongest. This was a 5. A crystalline student near the front raised a translucent appendage, her internal light flickering with what Jake had learned was anxiety. Her voice came through the translator as a series of harmonic chimes. Surely you evacuate to underground cities during these events? Your species must have developed extensive subterranean infrastructure for protection. Jake shook his head with a slight smile. Nah, we just board up the windows and wait it out. Most people ride them out in their regular houses. Some folks even throw hurricane parties. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the ventilation system humming. Even Professor Veltar had stopped looking at his grading tablet and was staring directly at Jake with all 4 eyes focused intently. Hurricane parties? Whispered a voice from somewhere in the room. Yeah. People get together, stock up on food and drinks, and wait for it to pass. Jake explained casually. Sometimes we chase them for fun. We call them storm chasers. They drive right up to tornadoes to study them. The silence was deafening. Jake looked out at 200 alien faces staring at him with expressions that ranged from disbelief to horror. The presentation was just getting started. Jake watched the stunned faces around the room and decided to keep the momentum going. The shocked silence told him he had their attention now, and he wasn't about to waste it. Then there's the ground itself, Jake continued, clicking to a new image. The screen showed a cross-section diagram of Earth's interior, with arrows indicating movement patterns. Our planet's crust is broken into massive plates that constantly move and collide with each other. He could see several students leaning forward now, their earlier boredom completely forgotten. The tree-like Verdani student's bark was shifting through different color patterns, which Jake had learned meant deep concentration or concern. These plates are huge, some the size of entire continents, and they're always grinding against each other. Sometimes the pressure builds up and releases all at once. Jake clicked the seismic footage, showing buildings swaying back and forth like giant pendulums. Streetlights bent like rubber, and cracks opened up in the pavement, while people ran for cover. This is what we call an earthquake, Jake explained as the footage showed a parking lot rippling like water. The ground literally moves like ocean waves, except it's solid rock. A student who looked like a walking collection of crystals began making a high-pitched whining sound. Through the translator, her voice came out shaky. How do you construct stable buildings on such unstable ground? We don't really, Jake shrugged. We just build them to sway with the movement and hope for the best. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The next slide showed aerial photos of San Francisco after the 1906 earthquake. The entire city looked like it had been bombed, with rubble-filled streets and buildings pancaked on top of each other. Fires burned everywhere, sending black smoke into the sky. This city was completely destroyed, Jake said, pointing to the devastation. Then he clicked to a modern aerial view of the same area, showing gleaming skyscrapers and bustling streets. And then we rebuilt it in exactly the same spot. He clicked again, showing current population statistics. 800,000 humans currently live right on top of the fault line where this happened. San Francisco sits directly on one of the most active earthquake zones on our planet. A gaseous entity near the front began rapidly cycling through different colors, deep blues to bright yellows to angry reds. Jake had learned this was their species' equivalent of hyperventilation or panic. The translator picked up fragments of their distress communication. Impossible, illogical, death wish. But wait, there's more, Jake said with a slight grin, enjoying the dramatic effect he was having. We also have mountains that explode. The new image showed Mount Vesuvius in all its threatening glory, with its distinctive cone shape and the sprawling city of Naples visible at its base. Steam rose gently from the crater, a constant reminder of the power sleeping below. These are volcanoes, Jake explained. They're basically holes in the ground where molten rock shoots out at temperatures over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. He showed footage of lava flows creeping across highways, setting everything in their path on fire. This particular mountain exploded about 2,000 years ago. The next slide showed the preserved ruins of Pompeii, human figures frozen forever in volcanic ash, their final moments captured in stone. The room fell completely silent as students stared at the haunting images. It buried an entire city and everyone in it. Jake continued conversationally, but we dug it up and turned it into a tourist attraction. People come from all over Earth to visit and take pictures. He clicked to a modern photo of tourists walking through Pompeii's ancient streets, smiling and posing for selfies next to the preserved bodies. About 2.5 million visitors every year. 3 students near the back quietly gathered their belongings and left the lecture hall. Jake noticed they were all from species that came from geologically stable worlds, the kind of planets where the ground stayed put and mountains didn't explode. Professor Veltar's 4 compound eyes were now focused entirely on Jake, his earlier disinterest replaced by what looked like growing alarm. "Human Jake," he interrupted, his clicking voice carrying a note of urgent concern. "What about radiation exposure from your star? Surely your species has developed underground habitation to avoid the deadly solar radiation." Jake laughed, and the sound seemed to make several students flinch. "Oh, we get blasted by our star constantly. Our sun pumps out radiation that would cook most organic life forms, and we just walk around in it every day." He clicked to a beach scene, hundreds of humans lying on sand, wearing minimal clothing, with their skin glistening in the bright sunlight. Some humans lie outside deliberately to absorb more radiation. We call it tanning. People think it makes them look healthier. The gaseous student in the front was now cycling through colors, so rapidly they looked like a living rainbow having a seizure. Professor Veltar made a sound Jake had never heard before, something between a click and a choke. "They do this for recreation?" the professor managed to ask. "Beach vacations are pretty popular." Jake nodded. "Some people spend their entire vacations lying in direct solar radiation for hours at a time. We even have businesses called tanning salons where you can pay to get blasted with artificial radiation if the sun isn't available." The room had grown so quiet that Jake could hear individual students breathing, which was quite an accomplishment considering half of them didn't actually breathe oxygen. And he was just getting warmed up. Jake could see he had the room's complete attention now, but he wasn't finished. The best part was still coming. He clicked to his next slide, which showed what looked like colorful abstract art under a microscope. "These are some of our smaller threats," Jake said, gesturing to the swirling, almost beautiful patterns on the screen. "Viruses and bacteria. They're invisible to the naked eye, but they're everywhere on Earth." He clicked through several microscopic images, each one showing different tiny organisms in vivid detail. "These little guys are constantly trying to kill us. The viruses rewrite their genetic code faster than we can develop countermeasures. Every year, they become something completely new." The crystalline student who had been asking questions earlier made a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "How do you defend against microscopic enemies that constantly evolve?" "We don't really," Jake admitted cheerfully. "We just get sick, fight them off, and hope our immune systems remember how to deal with them next time. Sometimes we win, sometimes we don't. It's like a constant war happening inside our bodies that we're mostly not even aware of." He clicked to show bacteria cultures growing in petri dishes, spreading across the surface like living paint. The bacteria are even trickier. We develop medicines called antibiotics to kill them, but they adapt to our medicines within years. Some of them are now completely immune to every drug we have. A collective shudder ran through the remaining students. The tree-like Verdani's bark had turned a deep, troubled purple, and several of the smaller species had moved closer together, as if seeking comfort in numbers. "But the microscopic stuff is just the beginning," Jake continued, clicking to his next slide. The image that appeared made several students gasp audibly. A massive great white shark filled the screen, its black eyes staring directly at the camera, rows of razor-sharp teeth visible in its open mouth. The creature looked like something from a nightmare, perfectly designed for killing. "We share our world with these," Jake said matter-of-factly. "This is a great white shark. They can grow over 20 feet long and bite through a small boat. Their teeth are sharper than surgical instruments." He clicked to show underwater footage of sharks gliding through the water with terrifying grace, their movements fluid and predatory. Some humans swim with them recreationally. They call it cage diving, though sometimes people do it without the cage. The footage showed exactly that: humans in scuba gear swimming freely near massive sharks, seemingly unconcerned about the apex predators circling them. One human was actually reaching out to touch a shark's fin. A faint thud echoed through the lecture hall as one of the smaller students toppled over in what could only be described as a faint. None of their classmates moved to help. They were all too transfixed by the images on screen. Jake clicked again, showing a massive grizzly bear rearing up on its hind legs. The creature stood over 8 feet tall, with claws like kitchen knives and muscles rippling under thick fur. Then we have these grizzly bears. They can weigh over 800 pounds and run faster than our fastest humans. The video showed a bear casually flipping over a boulder that must have weighed several tons, searching for food underneath. Others wrestle him for sport, Jake added, showing footage of humans in protective gear grappling with smaller bears in controlled environments. We call it bear wrestling. It's not legal everywhere, but people still do it. The gaseous student in the front had stopped changing colors entirely and was now a sickly gray-green. That didn't look healthy for their species. Jake's presentation moved on to images of venomous snakes, their colorful patterns beautiful and deadly. These inject poison that can kill you in minutes. Some people keep them as pets. He showed a video of a human casually handling a cobra. The snake's hood flared in obvious aggression. But the really impressive part, Jake continued, is where we choose to live. The screen filled with images of extreme environments. First, a mountain climber on Everest, oxygen mask covering his face, struggling through blinding snow at altitudes where the air was too thin to breathe properly. Our planet has regions where the air is so thin you can't get enough oxygen to live, Jake explained. People climb there anyway. Some of them die trying, but others keep going up. He clicked to show the Antarctic research stations, tiny dots of human civilization surrounded by endless white wasteland. Places so cold you'll freeze to death in minutes if you go outside without protection. We build research stations there, and people volunteer to live there for months. The next image showed Death Valley, where heat shimmers made the landscape look like an alien world. Deserts so hot, they'll literally cook you alive. The ground temperature can reach over 200 degrees Fahrenheit. People still live there, work there, even vacation there. Professor Veltar had been unusually quiet during this part of the presentation, but now he stood up slowly, his forearms trembling slightly. His compound eyes were focused entirely on Jake, and his voice carried a tremor that Jake had never heard before. Human Jake, the professor said carefully, according to our classification system, based on everything you described, you've just presented a Class 12 Death World scenario. That's the highest possible rating in our database. We reserve that classification for planets so hostile that we assume no complex life could possibly survive there. Jake blinked, looking genuinely surprised. Really? Huh. We just call it home. The silence that followed was so complete it felt solid. Jake barely made it halfway across the campus quad before he realized something had fundamentally changed. Word of his presentation had spread through the university's communication networks faster than he thought possible, and now every step he took felt like walking through a spotlight. The first sign was the Korthax student who'd been sitting behind him in advanced chemistry for 2 months. Previously, the sulfur-smelling alien had never so much as acknowledged Jake's existence. Now he scrambled out his path so quickly that he nearly tripped over his own clawed feet, muttering something in his native language that the translator rendered as Death World Survivor and Impossible Endurance. By the time Jake reached the main academic building, small groups of students were stopping their conversations to stare at him. The delicate, butterfly-like Futari, who usually ignored all ground-bound species, were actually landing to get a better look. Their gossamer wings shimmer with patterns Jake had learned meant extreme agitation or excitement. Is that really the human? He heard one whisper to another. The one who described the Class 12 world? Look how casually he walks, came the response. No protective gear, no environmental suit. He's just existing in normal atmosphere like it's nothing. Jake tried to ignore the attention and focus on getting to his next class, but it was becoming impossible. Everywhere he looked, alien eyes were tracking his movement. Some species communicated through color changes, and Jake was seeing a lot of colors he'd never observed before, deep purples and flashing golds that suggested awe or fear. As he climbed the steps to the Interstellar Relations building, a group approached him from the side. Jake recognized them immediately as military personnel. Their posture and matching insignia made it obvious even across species lines. The leader was a tall, blue-skinned humanoid with silver markings that indicated high rank in the Centauri Federation forces. Human Jake, the officer said, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone used to command. I am Commander Zenth of the Federation Defense Corps. We would like to discuss your species' potential military applications. Jake stopped walking and stared at the group of officers surrounding him. Military applications? He repeated, genuinely confused. I'm studying to be a park ranger. The officers exchanged meaningful glances, and Jake caught several of them making notes on their handheld devices. Commander Zenth leaned forward slightly, his expression intense. You mentioned that your species engages in recreational activities in environments that would kill most life forms within minutes. The commander continued. This suggests remarkable adaptability and stress tolerance. Your people might be uniquely suited for hostile environment operations. I just like hiking, Jake protested, but he could see the officers weren't really listening to his objections. They were looking at him like he was some kind of living weapon system. We'll be in touch, Commander Zen said, handing Jake a crystalline data chip. The Federation is very interested in establishing formal contact with Earth's military leadership. After the officers left, Jake stood on the steps, feeling more confused than ever. He'd given a simple presentation about home, and somehow it had turned into a recruitment opportunity for galactic warfare. Professor Veltar appeared beside him so quietly that Jake jumped. The massive insectoid professor's compound eyes reflected the afternoon light as he studied Jake with what appeared to be newfound respect. I've been looking for you, Professor Veltar clicked, his forearms gesturing in what Jake had learned was excitement. I'm recommending you for our advanced survival courses next semester. Environmental adaptation, extreme climate biology, and hostile world ecology. But those courses are restricted, Jake pointed out. He'd looked into them before, but been told his Category C species rating wasn't sufficient for enrollment. They're typically restricted to our most elite species, the professor agreed. The Pyro's heat-resistant specialists, the Nimbus pressure-adapted, the crystalline radiation-immune students. But after today's presentation, I think we need to reconsider what makes a species elite. As Jake walked back toward his dormitory later that afternoon, he noticed a change in how other students moved around him. Before, he'd been invisible, just another Category C student taking up space. Now, clusters of alien students parted respectfully as he approached, whispering among themselves in languages the universal translators struggled to keep up with. That's a human from the death world. He caught fragments of conversation. Lives with exploding mountains. Swims with the toothed beasts. Survives in burning deserts for fun. A group of Trelock students, who had previously treated him like furniture, actually bowed slightly as he passed. The gesture was so unexpected that Jake almost stumbled. Near his dorm entrance, he encountered Rebecca, one of the other two humans at the university. She was standing with Tyler, both of them looking as bewildered as Jake felt. What did you do? Rebecca asked immediately. Everyone's been asking us about Earth all day. Someone wanted to know if we'd ever been in an earthquake. I just gave a presentation for xenobiology. Jake said weakly, about home. Tyler shook his head in amazement. Dude, 3 separate professors have contacted me about research opportunities. They want to study human stress responses and adaptation mechanisms. One of them asked if I'd be willing to demonstrate how we survive in the presence of apex predators. As Jake climbed the stairs to his room, he reflected on how much had changed in just one day. This morning, he'd been the unremarkable human from a primitive Category C species, studying on the outer edges of galactic civilization. Now, apparently, he was Jake Thompson, survivor of Earth, the most hostile environment in known space. Someone who called home a world so dangerous that the galaxy's most advanced civilizations classified it as uninhabitable. The funny thing was, as he settled into his small dorm room and looked out at the alien skyline, Jake found himself missing things he'd never thought about before. The smell of rain before a thunderstorm, the way the ground felt solid and dependable, even though it might shake without warning. The simple pleasure of walking outside without an environmental suit, breathing air that hadn't been filtered and processed. Earth wasn't just his home. It had shaped him in ways he was only beginning to understand. And apparently, that made all the difference in how the galaxy saw not just him, but all of humanity. The primitive Category C species classification was about to become very outdated indeed.